Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Unsolicited Cognitions, the show where I give you the takes you didn't ask for on the stuff that maybe you wanted to hear about it. Highly anticipated, I'm sure. And tonight marks kind of a special event because in the theme song of 3 a.m. Soliloquies, I talk about, dealing with movies, but we actually haven't watched a single movie, or talked about a single movie, rather, on the channel yet. We haven't done it yet. So tonight, we're not talking about a game, we're not talking about a TV show, we're talking about a movie tonight. Additionally, a horror movie. I haven't really talked about it on the channel, but I'm kind of a big horror fan. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've seen, every horror movie, but I've seen enough of them to consider myself a fan. So the other night I sat down and watched
Late Night with the Devil.
And let me tell you, this is the type of movie that I would only recommend to somebody who said that they were actually like a horror fan. Somebody who wants to be scared. This isn't the type of movie that I would recommend for you if you are somebody who maybe dabbles in horror. And we'll go through it, beat by beat, and I'll kind of talk about what it is that made this movie kind of so insidious and creepy. And I mean, in a way that most horror movies don't. This one really stuck with me. Which it's also worth noting, I guess, that recently the channel hit 100 subs, so that's pretty nice. Those of you all who have subbed recently, welcome, and I thank you all. It's not big, but it is my hope, of course, that one day it'll grow. No way am I going to be able to take on 3 of them at once. Absolutely no way. Well, it's possible. I can't believe I pulled that off. Oh my god, the stupid grave bird. Yeah, of all the enemies in this DLC, these grave birds have been my nemesis for sure. So in order to talk about what made this movie so good, I have to talk about the setup, because I think what's missing in a lot of horror movies now is creating a setting where I feel like I care about the characters. When something horrifying happens in a horror movie, the only way it's going to be horrifying is if I've been given reason to care about these people to whom these horrible things are happening. And it's part of why, like, a slasher movie, Friday the 13th, Saw, those movies are fun to watch, because you want to see the kills. But it's not like those movies really disturb me in any way. People who are dying on screen, you don't really see them as real people. You understand that they're characters in the movie because that's all they're allowed to be. Part of what made Late Night with the Devil so kind of effective is that they really gave the world of the movie space to feel believable. Obviously, I knew I was watching a movie, but at no point in the movie did I ever think to myself, this is not something I could ever see happening in the real world. Watch, after I beat all those other ones at the same time, this one by himself is going to get me. It's kind of hard to talk about why this movie's good without talking about spoilers, so I'll try to keep it spoiler-free for as long as possible, and I'll give an indicator when we get to talking about spoilers. So the setup of the movie is presented almost like it's a true crime documentary. And it's a really great presentation. It's meant to kind of put you into the time of the movie and the atmosphere of things, It's the 70s. It's a turbulent time in American history. There's protests, there's violence, there's drugs, there's rock and roll. And in the midst of it all is our protagonist, Jack Delroy, who is the host of a late night talk show called Night Owls. So they walk you through like a montage of Jack's story. And I hesitate to say that the opening montage of the film was as effective as like Up, the most famous opening montage of a movie of all time. But that's what it reminded me of, Because in 5 minutes, you're given, this incredible, like, sweeping story of Jack Delroy and his wife, Madeline, who is a pretty famous actress, and the relationship they have together, the beautiful life that they've built, the loving community that Jack has fostered with his TV show. And it's such a happy opening. It's so full of life. And then, of course, you get the setup of, this is where something's going to go crazy, where they start talking about the Grove, which is an elite men's club that Jack is a part of, that they say is stationed out in the redwoods of California. And even though the Grove is introduced to us as a men's club, the narrator also mentions that there are rumors of it being, like a devil worshipping cult. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of see where this is going. It's just given the name of the movie and knowing what the movie's about. You don't even have to be someone who's familiar with horror to kind of guess where things are going from here. But yeah, the big tragedy of the movie and the catalyst that kind of sets Jack on the path that he's on throughout the film is the death of his wife, who gets lung cancer even though she's never smoked before. That's weird, but it's not that weird, right? Because that happens. People who have never smoked can get lung cancer. And that is the first instance of one of the things that I think is really cool about this movie, is that they keep you guessing. You're never really sure if what you're seeing is something to be concerned about or not. Because this movie, I'm going to keep drawing comparisons with other movies, much like Rashomon, where the big famous thing about that movie was that it distorted what the viewer was able to perceive as the truth by creating like these unreliable, conflicting narratives and showing things from different points of view. We're only really shown one point of view in the movie, but it's a very tenuous one because it's through the lens of the TV. And not only is it through the lens of the TV, it's through the lens of the show of a man that we know because his wife has passed, his ratings are on the downturn, he's been out of the public eye for a while, he's trying to make this big comeback, this Hail Mary show that's gonna, the fate of the entire show, his whole career, everything that he's worked for rests on this one night. So, since he's got nothing to lose, we're never sure what's real and what's not, and that is a big crux of what makes this movie so engaging to watch. It's also worth noting that the film is a bottle movie, I believe is the term. A movie where the entire thing takes place in one location, right? The whole movie takes place on the studio, soundstage, backlot, whatever. And people talk about like their favorite bottle episodes of TV all the time, the bottle episode of Breaking Bad, the bottle episode of Family Guy. But I feel like there's not as many bottle movies because a movie is longer. I feel like that's a format that lends itself really well to horror because you are trapped in this setting. There's no way out. You're there with whoever's suffering through this horrible thing. Oh, come on with this. Loser. And yeah, the bottle setting is a big part of what I think is the most effective thing about this movie, which is just the insidious way that it builds this feeling of creepiness and dread. Its ability to just kind of worm its way into and really make them feel the sort of creeping unease that the audience is feeling. Because, like I said, the big twist of this movie is not very difficult to guess. The name of the film is Late Night with the Devil, and at the very beginning of the movie, they tell you that Jack is in a shady Illuminati-type club/cult. That's part of what's so masterful about it, because even in it being a pretty easy conclusion to come to, you're still kind of kept guessing through the whole thing. And yeah, this movie isn't extremely violent or crazy or anything, aside from a few select scenes that we'll talk about later. And I think that's to the movie's credit, because again, to me, what really can make or break a horror film is how well it builds that creepiness, that inkling of fear and dread in the back of your brain that kind of sits there after the film is over. Because it's easy to shock people with blood and gore and like really gross or gruesome shit. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or that horror movies shouldn't do it, but it's always more effective when there's some kind of build-up around that. And it's not just the whole film and that's all it does for the entire 90 minutes, 2 hours, however long it is. And the more horror I watch, the more I appreciate that, because I feel like that's kind of rare because it's harder to do. So to get into the narrative of the movie itself, if you really want to reduce the movie down, it comes down to the relationship between Jack and his co-host Gus, Gus is like the Paul Schaefer to Jack's David Letterman, basically. He's his second in command who he riffs off of and makes all these jokes with. And we can see he's been there for the entire runtime of the show, so we can assume that Jack and Gus are pretty good friends. Gus is a couple of things to the movie. He's a representation of all the good aspects of the show, the warm and fuzzy Americana, like the good feelings, the good that the show has brought into people's lives. The thing that we would all like to think that all our favorite old TV shows are, versus all-consuming ambition, which I didn't mention actually. He's number 2 to Johnny Carson. That's the main driving force behind everything. Jack wants to beat Johnny Carson. And again, that's part of what I found so effective about the opening. The vignettes of Jack being like happy and jovial with his co-host and his producers and his wife. Just, it makes everything that happens in this movie feel much more insidious because I gave a shit. I really felt for Jack and Gus. When you start the movie off that happy, it makes the sad much more powerful. Gus is also the most direct conduit to the viewer's feelings, like the person watching the film, because he knows that something awful is going to happen if they don't continue the shit. The big thing is that Jack stages a show on Halloween night of 1977. The big premise of the movie is that we're watching the unreleased tape of that show. And because it's Halloween, he invites all these spooky guests. He invites Christu, who is a medium. He invites Dr. June, who's a paranormal expert, along with the girl Lily, who was rescued from a demon-worshipping cult, and who Dr. June now believes she is linked with an entity. Probably my favorite character of the movie, Haig. I forget what his first name is, but Haig, who, if you're familiar with James Randi, that's who Haig is. He's a character who, much like James Randi, is a magician who is also a skeptic, who makes his living out of going around and disproving psychic phenomena. I used to love watching James Randi back in high school and college. Oh god. Great, we got a brain of menses situation except with curse. Lovely. Because I was familiar with James Randi, I pretty much immediately clocked the character as being a James Randi reference. So, now that we've kind of covered all the basic aspects of the movie and what I liked about the atmosphere, we'll start getting into some of the specifics. This movie is shot in a really cool way, and part of that is just in what we can immediately see, which is that the movie has been, of course, done to look like a public access, CRT broadcast, complete with scan lines. Part of what made this movie so believable is that they really spared no expense with creating the aesthetic. They had a house band who was actually playing the music. You had the nice title cards and cue cards and We'll Be Right Back and everything. The documentary parts of the movie, so like the beginning part of the movie, it really looked like a documentary. They showed clips and vignettes, and it's just one of my favorite little things that they did to build the world of the movie was they drew up like a cartoon in the style of like a magazine cover. It's such a small detail amidst all the other amazing visual things going on in this movie, but it's one of the things that stuck out to me the most because somebody put real effort into drawing that, and it's only on screen for like 5-10 seconds. But I guess it makes sense. If you're filming the whole movie in one location, you don't have to pay to set up in a bunch of different places. So I guess it makes sense that you'd be able to give that higher level of detail to the one location. But then, there's this whole other world that we're privy to in the film. In addition to seeing the colorful CRT actual broadcast of the fictional show, we're also privy to the behind-the-scenes tapes of what went on with the production team and the executives backstage that night. So the whole movie, we're switching back and forth between the colorful broadcast and these black and white guerrilla style videos that were taken of the behind the scenes. And it's such a cool visual representation of one of the big thematic things of this movie, which is actually something that I've talked about on this show before, that being the veneer effect. So the last time we talked about the veneer effect, it was in the context of Adventure Time in general, how that show had made such a habit out of putting a mask on things. And that's a lot of what this movie's about. Oh, come on. So most fans may disagree about a lot of things, but we can all be aligned in our hatred of basilisks. At least we can all disagree that we hate seeing this enemy over and over. Did I say disagree? I meant agree. So behind the scenes, people are swearing, they're not putting on a facade and being fake nice for the camera. Whereas, obviously when the show's actually happening, it's all smiles and cordiality and professionalism. So it's cool because we get to see both. We get to see what people are presenting to the camera, and then we get to see what they're really feeling, you know? And very often the difference between the two is telling of, you know, more stuff that we're maybe not even seeing. To me, a lot of what is scary about a good horror movie is the idea of what lurks behind something. What's really there, what you're seeing versus what the truth is. And there's lots of different kinds of horror that deal with that. I've talked about eldritch horror on this channel many times, and how much I love that. We just got done doing the Lies of P video where I talked a lot about Bloodborne. And this is similar, because when you put on a performance, when you put on a live performance, whether that's a live telecast or a play, there's something inherently almost creepy or surreal about that to me. And I kind of feel like Nope played on that. There was the backstory with the chimp attack where the whole thing was kind of just buried. I feel like that was representative of a lot of stuff in film and TV industry that gets buried. Even recently, this Quiet on Set documentary came out that was all about the horrors that people went through behind the scenes of these TV shows. You know, what people are willing to do, or not even really what they're willing to do, but what they're forced to do to make it work. I feel like in the realm of TV and just like acting, thespianism, I feel like there's a lot of potential for stories about that. I'm not gonna lie, those eyeballs are creepy. And I don't think I can attack them either. Those things are spooky. I'm not gonna lie, I don't like those at all. And yeah, not to make it like a race thing, but it almost reminds me of minstrelsy, which similarly is a dark secret that has been buried in America's past. And it's even stranger because it was this thing where a whole generation of people grew up thinking that it was okay. And, you know, people who performed in these minstrel shows, obviously they hated it, but there wasn't anything they could do about it. They had to just keep doing their little dance because they had to eat. So I feel like a lot of times with like live thespianism, it's almost this thing where you're being like puppeteered. But yeah, with the veneer effect and people putting on a facade, it all really plays, again, it plays into the overall format of the movie, which is that we never know what's real. And with TV anyway, we never know what's real. And it all, see, everything that goes on in this movie, visually and thematically, it all works together. Part of why I like the character of Haig so much, besides that he's James Randi, is that he provides a very specific and important purpose in the movie, which is to keep the viewer and like the in-movie audience guessing about what's real versus what's not. And his presence is cool because not only does he really drive that push and pull of what's real, but he also helps create a willing suspension of disbelief. Because a lot of times in these kind of horror movies, the whole thing is like, why would you not just leave? If you know something's weird, why would you not just leave? And Haig's presence is cool because the whole movie, his whole purpose is just like, oh, it's all bullshit. This is a very common trick employed by magicians. This is what they're doing. What you're seeing isn't any cause for alarm. It's not real. No need to be worried. And that's his whole purpose in this movie, and that's really cool. See, it's not just that this movie was creepy or scary, it's that it was just a really good movie, and all the themes of it worked together really well. For the production team, it's one thing for them to stay there, because they don't really have a choice, right? That's their job, and if they walk off of the production, they're going to get blacklisted, and they're never going to be able to work in that field again. So it's one thing for them to leave, but it's another thing for the audience. Nothing's really keeping them there, you know? They don't really have a reason to stay. Of course, he can still hit me down here. Oh my god. Or maybe he can't. Okay, good. Some mercy there, at least. Good lord. I haven't tried this one yet. Oh my. Well, that did way more damage than I thought it was going to. Yeah, let's fucking... let's use that shit. Come on with this gank. Oh my god. Look at him. Oh my fucking god. Thank god. That was the money shot. Jesus Christ. Holy shit. Holy shit. Fuck. Oh my god. God, that was awful. The first inkling in the movie that we get of something supernatural going down is the medium at the beginning of the movie, Christo. He makes contact, or he claims to make contact with some people, and it's the same, charlatan stuff that we've seen James Randi disprove in real life, where he claims to make contact with a deceased relative, but it turns out that there was an information card that got filled out before they came on set. How am I supposed to dodge this? There's literally no way to dodge that. Even if you roll out of the way, it just bounces off the wall and hits you anyway. Even this is really clever, because in him doing that, it creates this reasonable doubt for the viewer as to whether or not he is actually a psychic when the first weird shit of the movie actually does happen. Christo, apparently in great pain, falls to his knees and claims to be making contact with a powerful addressal from someone named Minnie. It's another Death Knight, but he has a different weapon than the last guy I fought. The Death Knight be weak to Holy? Probably, right? Oh my god. And of course, because everything that's happened up to this point is so clearly fake, we as the viewer were like, okay, yeah, sure, Minnie. But then as the movie goes on, Jack, of course, he's like, okay, well, Minnie was the private name of my wife, Madeline. And so you as the viewer are going, oh my god, maybe he's the real deal. But also, you might not be doing that, because Jack is desperate, and he needs this show to be good to save his show. The first real inkling we get that something is wrong is when, after making contact with Minnie, Christo is clearly, visibly not well. And as the show goes on, he just gets sicker and sicker until eventually he vomits up this black bile. And that's when you realize you're watching a possession movie. Because the universal sign of an evil spirit being involved in a possession movie is somebody vomiting up black bile. Of course. Oh my god. About to choke. For those of y'all that don't know, that's what I do. I choke in the clutch in video games. Not this time, I guess. I almost did, though. Anyway, after Christo vomits this black bile, this is really kind of the turning point of the movie. He gets rushed off in an ambulance, and we later find out that he died on the way to the hospital, which really spooks the production team, including Gus, who continuously tries to tell Jack that they need to stop the show because if they don't, something terrible is going to happen. And of course, this is where the ambition of Jack comes in. Because as the movie goes on, Jack becomes less concerned about the safety of what he's doing and more about how great the ratings from it are going to be. Because we as human beings, we like watching terrible shit. We enjoy seeing people... Maybe we don't enjoy it, but we find people going through terrible things interesting. That's why dramas are so popular. That's why only bad things are ever on the news. And so this movie works on that level too, of kind of forcing us to examine how often and how freely we televise and monetize trauma. And again, the exploitative nature of the Hollywood industry, right? As depicted by what goes on in this movie. Which the next big thing that happens in the movie is very indicative of this. A live seance is performed involving Lily. We get to watch a little documentary of her, and it turns out that she was a child in this cult that worships an entity called Abraxas. And long story short, the cult was found out. It was rumored that they were using kids exclusively as sacrifices within the cult. The police raided the place, and the entire group self-immolated, basically. And the only person who survived was this little girl, Lily, who Dr. June has taken in and raised, even while writing a book about the entity she believes Lily to be harboring. Even though June condemns Jack's willingness to use Lily for the TV show, has she not been using Lily for the book? Has she not also been monetizing Lily's tragedy? So from the beginning, we can obviously Lily's off. She's looking into the camera She's speaking about how she's met Jack before. Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Oh, my God. I think I speak for everybody who has played and is playing this game. I say, fuck a rune bear, dude. It doesn't matter how high level you are. It doesn't matter how long you've been playing for. Fuck a rune bear. But anyway, Jack's lust for content wins out, and they end up performing the seance live on television. And that goes about as well as you'd expect. Lily's voice changes, she hovers in the air for a second, she says all these things, but she also kind of drops some interesting lore tidbits. So in a possession movie, you will generally have, like, there's two things that are pretty much guaranteed in any possession movie. You will have either an exorcism or a seance. Sometimes you'll have both. To bring up Hereditary for the first but not last time in this video, I would say Hereditary has the best seance scene that I've ever seen, personally. Am I going to sit here and tell you that the seance scene in this movie was as scary as that one? No. But it was still effective. It was the first thing in the movie where it was really like, okay, hey, there's no way you could possibly explain this away. This has to be something supernatural. This leads us into one of the most interesting things in the movie, and probably the most disturbing scene of the movie to me, which is the mass hypnosis scene. This is the first part of the movie where things really kind of start to descend into a nightmare. Haig hypnotizes Gus, and shortly thereafter we start to hear this spooky wailing, and Gus basically bursts open with worms. Worms start coming out of his neck, out of his intestines. A big worm bursts out of his eyeball. Part of what's so cool about this scene is that even though it is once again Haig trying to prove that nothing that we've seen so far is real, I mean, it only kind of serves to blur the line even more. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I first saw this scene, my immediate thought was that Haig was like the devil in disguise or something like that. And I almost feel like the movie wants you to think that when you first see that scene, because there's a bunch of scenes in the movie where he's like lurking around corners, staring people down from afar. He's doing all this like shit. He's like leering at people, and like even the way he's dressed and the way he looks, he kind of just looks like a trickster god. There's this interesting part during the worm scene where he like winks at the viewer, and I was like, oh my god, this guy's been the devil all along. But no, he was just playing a trick. And then after he does it, he like kind of gloats, and he's like, man, you guys are suggestible. And it's like, yeah, I am suggestible. I was fully prepared to believe that Haig had supernatural powers, which, ironically, him doing this does lead to irrefutable evidence of deviltry. So when we rewind the cameras, we can see that the worms aren't actually there, which confirms that seeing them was just part of the mass hypnosis. However, when we wind the tapes back to the seance, all the shit that happened there is still there, which prompts Haig to realize that it is in fact an actual paranormal entity, which of course prompts the entity to emerge. Which brings us to the last act of the movie. Even now, after the seance, it's such a clever way to continue that dance of like, is it real or is it not? Because the craziest scene in the entire movie was just proven to be a complete fabrication. So if that wasn't real, literally everything else, it's still possible that it's fake. In watching the tape, it forces Mr. Wriggles to emerge. So this entity kind of has like video powers. It distorts reality, it kills several members of the crew in very violent ways. Basically pulls Jack into this sort of nightmare reality where he kind of relives a bunch of the moments of his show through this twisted, alternate, like nightmarish lens. And even though a lot of what goes on in this scene is not objectively scary in the conventional sense, it's still very creepy to me because it really echoes, again, this theme of like the veneer, you know? You're seeing the audience, you're seeing them laughing behind this like pall of darkness, and that in and of itself isn't that crazy, but it's just the idea that, you know, that's not really what you're looking at. Who or what really is that that's there? Because it's not people. It can't be people. Not in this place. The final thing that happens in the movie is that Jack is forced to relive some of the decisions that he made. There's two things that really make this scene creepy to me. Is it one, again, it's like a Hereditary thing where there's all these people who were around in the movie. There's people from the production crew, from like some of the documentary style flashbacks. There's a guy from the audience who never says a word, and when he never said a word, I kind of assumed that he was probably involved with the Grove. And they force Jack to take part in this ritual, at the end of which he finds his wife in a room and is forced to kill her. And when he comes to, it's back in the real world where everybody on the soundstage is dead. He's just stabbed Lily and the cops are on their way, so he is now the only one there, and the blood is on his hands. It's a pretty crazy ending. Both the literal and metaphorical implication of it is that through his ambition, Jack destroyed everyone around him. And that sucks, because from what we can tell, Jack is genuinely a good guy. But as the movie goes on, we start to see him descend down this pit of like needing to do more for ratings, you know, wanting to go bigger and crazier. There's just so much that we don't know when the credits roll. Did Jack actually kill his wife? Like, by the end of the movie, we find out that the reason that she got cancer was because Jack made a pact with the entity when he was with the Grove. The entity accuses him. Jack claims they've never met. The entity says that they did meet among tall trees, which is obviously a reference to the redwoods where the Grove has their secret society. So Jack at some point made a deal with this entity. But there's so much we don't know about that. Does Jack even remember having made the deal? Because it seems like he doesn't remember. So is making the deal a voluntary thing, or are you coerced into doing it by this group? Is Jack at fault at all here, or is he completely a victim? Like, yes, during the show, he continued to push for more and more dangerous shit, even knowing that it was dangerous because he wanted those ratings, you know? But was that ambition his own, or was it fueled by the influence of the entity that is apparently in control of the Grove? And you're left wondering if any of what you see at the movie is real. Did any of that actually happen? Was it a metaphorical representation? Was it this distorted thing that the entity was showing to Jack just to like scare him? Who knows? And that's part of what's fun, is the not knowing. All you know is that something terrible has happened, and the more you think about it, the more it kind of seems like Jack was just as much a victim as anyone. You know, a pawn. Because we also know that Abraxas seeks chaos and destruction. And much like, I've been referencing a lot of other movies in this video, but much like the demon in Smile, we are expressly told that the demon in this movie thrives on an audience. But yeah, it's tricky to find a good balance in horror of showing versus implying, right? Because like I've already said in a bunch of other videos, imagination is fun in horror. It's good to let the viewer kind of decide on their own what's scariest. It's good to just give them little hints here and there of what's going on and then just let them chew on that. But I guess that depends on who you are, because if you have an active imagination like I do, and like I have my entire life for better or worse, then that's going to work for you. But if you don't, then maybe it doesn't. And maybe that decides what kind of horror movies people like versus what kind of horror movies they don't. Maybe if you're somebody who doesn't have a lot of imagination, you'll naturally gravitate towards slashers more because they give you everything. I don't know. Part of what's fun about letting imagination and creepiness and insidious connections drive your horror is that you can give people something without really giving it to them, which is a lot of what, Bloodborne does, right? Bloodborne has all of this recurring imagery, enemies that look like other enemies, motifs that you've seen in other places, but it never really gives you the pieces to fully put it all together. It leaves it to you to do that yourself, to the extent that you want to or that you can. And a lot of these kinds of movies, which again, to bring Hereditary back into it, Hereditary did the same thing, where it would give you these arcane symbols that would appear here and there, or it would show you like a flash of someone around a corner and you're wondering, oh, what are they doing there? Is an example, a great example of this movie. Lily calls the entity Mr. Wriggles, right? And during the nightmare flashback, when Jack is reliving moments from his past shows, one of his guests who brought her pet tarantula on, rather than taking that out in the nightmare flashback, she takes out the giant worm from the mass hypnosis. And the word wriggle for most people is going to suggest a worm. Is that worm, that big worm that we see in the hypnosis, supposed to be representative of Mr. Wriggles? Is that how he manifests himself? Who knows? Addendum. Here's another interesting thing that I noticed about the movie that I didn't really notice until I was working on this video. During the mass hypnosis scene, there's a part where Haig tries to deactivate the hypnosis, basically. You can see him try to snap his fingers, and he acts surprised when the hypnosis continues. This is also the part in the scene when the giant worm bursts out of Gus's face. Now, later on in the video, which I just talked about, I hypothesized that that worm might be sort of the physical manifestation of the entity that Lily refers to as Mr. Wriggles. Is it possible that Mr. Wriggles is manifesting himself into this hypnosis here, causing it to continue, and that's why Haig is surprised when it's not stopping, because this part of the hypnosis ritual is not his doing. It's the entity that's doing it. I could be way off base with this. Haig, being who he is, being a trickster, it's very possible that he was just acting surprised to further the illusion. But also, Haig, being who he is, it's completely possible that he was genuinely surprised. He didn't know what was going on, why he couldn't stop the hypnosis. And in not mentioning that he lost control over it, he was just trying to save face and appear like he was the mastermind. Another one of those things where it's like, who knows? What it all boils down to is creating a feeling of dread. More than maybe anything else, I feel like dread is one of the most powerful tools when you're making a horror movie, because it's so utterly internal. Dread is something that you can inspire people to, but everybody's personal sense of what they dread is going to be different and completely personal to them. The thing I dread in my dreams, I mean, it doesn't even have a form. The thing I dread in my dreams, it doesn't have a face. When I imagine it, it doesn't look like anything. It doesn't look like any particular creature or being or anything like that. It's just this formless thing that I know would be utterly horrifying to see. And that is what a lot of the best horror movies, in my opinion, play off of. Is that idea of, you don't see this thing, you'll never see this thing, but you know that it's there, and you know that it terrifies you. Maybe in my dreams, so I've brought it up a bunch of times through this video already, but I feel like as more people talk about this movie, it's going to draw a lot of Hereditary comparisons. With a shadowy cabal whose members are all over the place, a pact that was struck with an entity in the past that's having adverse effects. The people who are affected by the entity maybe were not even directly involved in making the deal. Everybody winds up dead as a pawn to the thing. Watching this movie, maybe not even while I was watching it, but definitely once I finished it, it really, really, really reminded me of Hereditary in so many ways. As more people talk about this movie, I feel like that'll be a common comparison. Great. Here comes this dude to fucking box me with his infinite stamina. But he has no poise though. Oh, nope. I'm wrong about that. These Hereditary comparisons, the idea of dread, the formless thing in my dreams, what it all comes down to is that nothing is more terrifying to beings whose whole power over this world is knowing, right? That's the thing that gives us humans power. Nothing is more scary to us than not knowing. Wow. Now, the movie just dealt with a lot of stuff that I feel like is maybe more relevant now than ever. Again, with all these documentaries coming out about shady practices in the television and film industry, there's one really kind of evil little line at the beginning of the movie that I missed the first time I watched, but caught the second time. A dude asks Jack what he had to sacrifice to get where he is. Which, you know, you hear that again at the end of the movie during the nightmare sequence, but you don't think much of it because by this point it's pretty obvious what he sacrificed to get there. But I sure wish these fuckers had stamina. You can never stop him from getting the heal off. There's not even a point in trying, really. Oh, come. You can spam that one more time? Bitch. I feel like at the core of a lot of these modern possession movies are ideas that we find very relatable. To bring up Hereditary again, part of what made that movie so visceral and frightening for a lot of people is that the idea of the horror being a broken family unit was relatable. That movie was pretty intense even without all the supernatural stuff. And I feel like this movie kind of operates on that same level, you know? It's easy to get lost in ambition and the desire to be the best and realize that you're not appreciating what you have around you, and before you know it, your ambition has destroyed everything. Pride before the fall, hubris over ambition, all that stuff. All those good literary themes that we're used to seeing in lots of other places. But they're done in a very cool way here. So, yeah, that's Late Night with the Devil. And maybe at some point I'll do a follow-up video, because I like to do research about, you know, the creator's intentions, behind-the-scenes stuff, interviews, that kind of thing. So, I don't know. If you all wanted to see something like that, maybe I would do that video, but I don't know. We'll see. Anyhow, that's it for tonight, so see ya.